Most suspected Thai, dear Sangha, breathing in, I come back to the island within myself. Breathing out, I know that is the safest place for me to be right now. Island of self, feeling safe. Most respected Thai, dear Sangha, today is the 29th of October in the year 2020, and we are in the still water meditation hall in the Upper Hamlet on our monastic day. And last time we met, we were talking about the Sutra on the 4 kinds of nutriment. And we came to the 4th kind of nutriment, which is the consciousness food. And last time we also talked a little bit about the different links of interdependence, because this sutra is found in the chapter which is about interdependence, the 12 links of interdependence. So traditionally, when people talk about consciousness food in Buddhism, they understand that it means the way our consciousness is at the moment of death is what will lead to our rebirth in our next life. But this is not exactly what we learn in Plum Village. In Plum Village we learn that the consciousness food is the food of the collective consciousness, is the first thing we learn. And the second thing we learn is that the consciousness food is our store consciousness, the part of store consciousness that we consider to be ourself, that is our own memories, what we have experienced in our life. So these are the ways we look at consciousness food in Plum Village. So if you think about collective consciousness, it also includes your individual consciousness. The two, collective and individual, are not two separate things. They're always interacting with each other. So you can't ever really say, oh, this is 100% collective, and this is 100% my individual consciousness. They contain each other. But we can make a general distinction between what I feel because of the collective consciousness and what I feel because of my own personal memories. So in the example that the Buddha gives for consciousness, we hear about a criminal who has to be stabbed by a sharp knife 100 times, and he doesn't die. So he has to be stabbed another 100 times, and he doesn't die. And then he has to be stabbed in the evening another 100 times. And the Buddha asked, do you think that person suffered? And the monk said, to be stabbed one time is great suffering, let alone 300 times. If you remember one of the sutras in the Arthapada, the sutra on transforming fear and violence, in that the Buddha also talks about talks about a sharp knife, and say the reason why people are violent is because they have a sharp knife in their heart. So our practice of understanding consciousness food means to understand how in our daily life we suffer because of what comes up from our own consciousness, our own stored consciousness, or what comes up in us from the collective consciousness. I think today, this morning, we're very aware of the collective consciousness. We're very aware that we cannot possibly be separate from the people in the world who are suffering at this time. And that the suffering in the world is also our suffering. So in Vietnam now, the disaster of the storm and the flood has touched many people very deeply. And from Saigon and from the south of Vietnam, there are many busloads of people going to the center of Vietnam in order to bring aid. They want to help. And so much so that there are even traffic jams with people wanting to bring aid. And the hotel owners in the center of Vietnam, they allow people who are bringing aid to stay free without paying in their hotel. So this is the kind of collective compassion that is brought about by suffering. And so suffering is a food for compassion. But suffering is also a food for fear and for violence. And in our daily practice, we look deeply when we get in touch with suffering in ourself or in our world, in order to ask, is this giving rise to compassion in me? Or is this giving rise to fear and frustration? So sometimes we want to be in touch, we want to know what's happening in the world, but the more we are in touch, the more we feel helpless. And when we feel helpless, we cannot feel compassion. The two things don't go together. So we need to know that now is the time not to be in touch with the suffering. But in that time, I need to come back to the island of myself. I need to nourish myself with the mindful walking. And when my mind is still, I can look deeply, and then I can see what the best contribution I can make is. We have examples from Thai's life, from our teacher's life, about being in very difficult situations of suffering. And at one point, when Thai thought that he could not help the boat people anymore, Thai wrote the calligraphy, Yup ang tak tak ang. If you want peace, wanting peace, you make peace. So that is, you come back and you make the inner peace. In our lifetime, as we may have memories of suffering, and if we don't recognize where our suffering is coming from, it causes us to suffer, and it causes us at the same time to do things which make other people suffer. So we need to take good care of our 5-year-old child. I remember when I was a school teacher, I used to look at my pupils, and sometimes I would see that one of the pupils was behaving in a rather violent way, and I didn't know why. So I would have to ask, what is happening at home for this particular pupil of mine? And very often it's that mother and father are fighting, and or mother and father are getting divorced, and this would immediately change the behavior of their children. Because of course we made up of half of our chromosomes are mother, and half of our chromosomes are father. So when mother and father outside of us fight, there's also a fight goes on in ourselves. There's a conflict that goes on in ourselves. So that causes us to suffer. And that because we don't understand that suffering, it spills out onto other people. We have the conflict in ourselves, and we come into conflict with other people because we project that conflict. And many of us have this experience of having to watch our parents quarrel, watch our parents fight, and because of that we suffered a lot as a child. But we don't know that is what is causing us to suffer now. So we need to look deeply. Now we have in the world, we have the suffering from natural disasters, which also in part are due to our human actions and not taking good care of the environment. But we also have the suffering that comes from our discriminating mind, our discriminating consciousness. And this suffering, it also goes into the collective consciousness. So we have the suffering which is brought about by racial discrimination. On the 25th of May, earlier this year, a policeman killed a black man in Minneapolis in the United States. And after that, there were demonstrations everywhere in the world. People were deeply shocked by this killing because it could have been easily avoided. There was no need to kill that man. He just gave some money, which the shopkeeper said was counterfeit, counterfeit, not real money. The forgery money. They said, and they rang the police, so you don't need to die because of you do something like that. And when the policeman caught hold of him and he started to struggle, they put him down the policeman put him down on the ground and then knelt on his neck so that he couldn't breathe. And because he couldn't breathe, he died. This is the kind of injustice that sometimes that the black people have had. And at that time, many white people were very shocked, as well as, of course, many black people were very shocked. And so there were demonstrations everywhere in the world. And this continues, the pain and the suffering. Of course, one person's death is just like the last straw on the camel's back, and then all the suffering comes up. And this is something that in our own Sangha, we now have to look at a little bit. Because in our own Sangha, we have people who are black. But they are not very many. And so they don't feel happy. They don't feel that we welcome the black people enough. And this is part of the collective consciousness. And together we have to find ways. So I have to look deeply now because I'm in a group that is looking into this matter, and all I could suggest is at the moment is that we made a few mistakes. That we make an apology first of all, we make an apology for the mistakes we made. That is our group of editors on the mindfulness bell. And on the other hand, we listen deeply. We practice just to listen deeply about how we have made black people suffer. So I cannot really say that I haven't done anything. It's nothing to do with me. I have to play my role of accepting responsibility for mistakes that maybe other people have made, and to listen deeply. So So this afternoon we were going to have a skit. And I thought I was going to be in that skit. But now everything is changing at the last minute. And this may be our last monastic day for the time together. So the program changed. And the skit is not happening. So when I heard that I was going to be in the skit, I said, and then somebody said, "Oh, you'll be a bodhisattva in the skit." I thought I might be Mara, but in the end I turned out to be bodhisattva. It's possible to be both. And so the sisters in the New Hamlet, they made a costume for me. And I said, if I'm going to be a bodhisattva, I don't want to be a human bodhisattva. So I don't want to have a human face. Because at that time I thought we're talking about non-discrimination. If I have a white face and I'm a bodhisattva, then I don't know what people with black faces or yellow faces will think. The bodhisattva, anyway, but I was feel a little bit about. So I asked her, please make me a costume that you don't see my face. So this is something that we all have to go through at the moment. To accept that the color of our skin is important. Before we thought that it didn't matter what color our skin was. But now we realize that if we produce a face with this color skin, immediately people will have feelings that respond to that. So we have a lot to learn in order to be able to help put an end to the division and the violence in the world. But on the other hand, we don't want to make ourselves feel that we are guilty for things, rather to feel that we have the power by our practice to make things better. I wanted today to share another sutra with you. It's from the Majjhima Nikaya, number 67, and it's called Chattuma. And Chattuma is a place in the Sakyan of the Buddha's family, in the Sakyan territory. And the Buddha was staying there. And one day, Shariputra and Moggallana, they brought 500 newly ordained monks to see the Buddha. And those newly ordained monks were very excited. And they made a lot of noise. They were going to stay a few days in the monastery with the Buddha. And when they arrived, they had to get out their new bedding, and they had to put their bowls and their robes away. And they were so excited to see their brothers that they made a lot of noise. And then the Buddha called Ananda and said, "Ananda, what is that terrible noise? It sounds like we're in the fish market." And Ananda said, well, there's 500 monks led by Shariputra and Moggallana who just arrived. They're very excited. And the Buddha said, tell them to come and see the Buddha. Tell the monks to come. So they came and they prostrated in front of the Buddha and they sat down. And the Buddha said, "Monks, what's all that noise about? It sounds like a fish market." And the monks said, "Oh, we just arrived and we're just putting away our things and greeting our brothers." And so on. The Buddha said, you can't stay with me. You can't stay with me. Go away. So the monks stood up, they prostrated to the Buddha, and they went away. They went out of the monastery. And then the Buddha called Shariputra and Moggallana and said to the two monks, said to Shariputra, "Shariputra, what did you think when I said the monks had to go away?" And Shariputra said, "I thought that the Buddha wants to practice Drishta Dharma Sukha Viharin." He wants to practice Hieng Vap Lak Tru, and there's too much noise for him to practice. So he told them to go away. And then I thought, oh good, I can also practice Hieng Vap Lak Tru. And then at that point the Buddha said, "Stop, Shariputra, stop. Don't talk about Hieng Vap Lak Tru. Don't talk about dwelling peacefully, happily in the present moment." And then he said, "Moggallana, what did you think when I told the monks to go away?" And Moggallana said, "Lord Buddha, I thought that the Buddha is not going to take care of these young monks now, so it's up to me and Shariputra to take care of them and to guide them." And the Buddha said, "Good, Moggallana. If the Buddha is not there to take care of the monks, it's up to you and Shariputra to guide them." So obviously when the Buddha sent away the monks like that, it's not just to teach the young monks they shouldn't make a noise. It's also to teach Shariputra and Moggallana they have to take care of their younger brothers. They have to guide their younger brothers. So after that, it's also true of the sisters, have to take care of your younger sisters, but they happen to be brothers. So after that, when the monks, these young monks, they went out into the town, then they were seen by the local elders, the lay people, who were having a meeting, and they said, "Where are you going?" And they said, "The Buddha has sent us away." And they said, wait, don't go away, just wait here." And then the god Brahma was also looking on from the Brahma heaven, and he thought, "Oh, now I need to go and talk to the Buddha." The Brahma thought that, and the Shakyan elders, they also thought that. So the Shakyan elders, they came to the Buddha, asked if they can talk to the Buddha, and they said, "Lord Buddha, you remember how compassionate you were to the young monks in the past? Can you be compassionate again? Because these young monks, they are like small plants that only just start to come up from the ground. And if they don't have the water of your teachings, they may change their minds and stop being monks." And then they gave another example. They say, "These young monks are like calves. They need their mother's milk. If they don't, something will happen to them. So they may change their minds and go somewhere else, stop being monks. So please, Lord Buddha, please be compassionate to them and guide them and give them teaching." And so the Buddha listened, and then Brahma, the god Brahma, he came and said the same thing. And in the sutra it says the Buddha was moved by the example of the calf and the young plants that need the water. So the Buddha was silent, and Shariputra and Moggallana brought the young monks back again. So one thing we need to remember about this sutra is the Buddha's not just teaching the young monks, he's also teaching Shariputra and Moggallana to take care of them. And then when they came back, the Buddha obviously saw that that maybe that Shariputra and Moggallana hadn't given the kind of guidance that they needed. So now the Buddha had to do that. For instance, when they first came and made a noise, Shariputra and Moggallana should have told them to quieten down, but they didn't. So the teaching that the Buddha gave was just for newly ordained monks, but actually it is also for newly ordained nuns and also for monks and nuns who have been ordained for a long time. So there are 4 dangers when you go down to the sea. And the first danger is the waves, big waves. And the second danger is the crocodiles. And the third danger is the whirlpools, the currents. The fourth danger is the sharks. So these are 4 dangers. And when you are a monk or a nun, there are 4 things that are dangers for you remaining a monk or a nun. So the first thing is that your brothers and sisters who ordained before you, but maybe much younger than you are in age, they keep correcting you. They say, you should wear your robe like that, you shouldn't walk like that, you should sit like that, you should eat like that, you shouldn't... And in the end you are tired of being told what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And you think, oh, before I became ordained, I used to tell other people what to do. And now other people are always telling me, and those people who tell me what to do are young enough to be my children or my grandchildren even. So I think I will go back to the lay life. So offering guidance and reminding is something that we do in the monastic sangha. And many of my sisters, they really appreciate receiving guidance. Of course, if it's up to me how I give the guidance too. But I feel very happy when my sisters are happy to be reminded. And in the past, I ordained when I was 39 years old, and I used to have, and after that, even though I was elder in ordination, my younger sisters also used to remind me. And when my younger sisters reminded me, my first reaction was always, I don't like it. That was my first reaction. But I learned to be able to look deeply and to go away and see that it's good for me to be reminded. And so with the practice, I was able to receive reminders much easier. And sometimes Thai would remind me in front of the whole Sangha. I didn't like that very much. But I knew that when Thai reminded me about something in front of the whole Sangha, it was very important. And that Thai felt that if Thai just reminded me on my own, I might not take it so seriously. And one time when Thai reminded me in front of the Sangha, I went to Thai afterwards and I expressed my regret. And Thai said, I wasn't just reminding you, I wanted the whole Sangha to be reminded at the same time. So we need reminders. Yeah. And the second thing is that to be afraid of the danger of the crocodile. And that is when you look back to when you come to the line where it's serving food. And you look at the food and you think, this isn't the kind of food I like. When I was a layperson, I used to be able to eat and drink the food that I liked. And now I have to eat muesli, or the other way around. I have to eat rice every day. And I don't like it. And also when I was a layperson, I could eat any time I liked. And now I can't. So that is the crocodile, which take you away from the monastic life. Looking at the food and not approving of the food. And the third thing, which is the whirlpools. When the monks go into the town on the alms round, they get in touch with all kinds of things around them. And we know that when the bee visits the flower, it just takes the nectar and it doesn't destroy the fragrance and beauty of the flower. So similarly on the alms round, we practice coming back to ourselves, and we don't get lost in what is happening around us. When we go to the town and we look around and we get lost in material things around us, and lost by seeing people enjoying those material things, we can also lose our monastic life. So whenever we go out of the monastery, we always practice mindfulness to remind ourselves about being a monastic and not getting lost in what's happening around us. And of course the same is true when we don't go out of the monastery, but we use the computer. If we get in touch with too many things that lay people are enjoying and we are not able to enjoy, that is also a reason for us to lose our monastic life. And finally, there is the matter of going into the town and the feeling of sexual desire coming up. So this is the fourth reason for losing our monastic life. That is that we're not able to deal with, we're not able to handle our sexual desire. So we have teachings from Thai about how to take care of this particular aspect, so that it's not the shark that needs to take us out of our monastic life. Because our monastic life is the deepest part of our desire. And if other desires that are less deep, they can take our monastic life away from us. And I think also that we need for the young, our new ordained, we need to organize teachings. We have teachings from Thai, but as elder brothers and sisters, we also need to give teachings to our sisters, need to give teachings to our sisters, and our brothers to our brothers on handling sexual desire. I remember once in a precept class, a young sister asked her, could we have more teachings on handling sexual desire? And I didn't respond to that. And later on, that sister, under regrettable circumstances, she had to leave the Sangha. So that is something for us to learn from. While we were looking at the sutra on the 4 kinds of nutriment, I recognized that we may need to look at the 12 nidanas, or look at the interdependent co-arising, because it's a very, very deep teaching, and it's not easy to understand, and I think it's been misunderstood by many people. And Thai has taught us very well in 2012, 2013 on this topic. So we can look at it again with the help of the sutras, and especially with the help of the sutra which is in the Digha Nikaya, which is the Trungpo, the long length sayings, number 15, and it's called the Mahanidana Sutta. In the Digha Nikaya, there are 3 sutras that talk about interdependent co-arising, and none of them talk about the 12 links. And one of them have 6 links. One of the sutra talk about 6 links. One sutra talk about 9 links, and one sutra talk about 10 links. So this is an opportunity for us to be able to understand a little bit deeper that the Buddha didn't just teach the 12 links. That was something that came later, that people. And if we next time and a little bit today, maybe we can look at the Digha Nikaya number 15, in order to see that is the sutra where the Buddha is talking to Ananda. And Ananda says the teaching on interdependent arising is very wonderful, is very deep and very wonderful. As if Ananda had understood it. And so the Buddha said, don't say that, Ananda. The teaching on interdependent arising is very difficult to understand. Don't think that you already understand it. And then the Buddha talked about the nine links. And for me, interdependent arising and this particular teaching is something that every year I understand a little differently from the year before. It's not something that you just understand and it's finished. So like the Buddha says, it's difficult to understand and it's very deep. So I will try and share a little bit about what I understood about this sutra. So first of all, the Buddha tells Ananda that old age and death are dependent on what? He asks Ananda, old age and death, what are they dependent on? And after that he says, dependent on birth, old age and death. So when you see that, you think that, oh, if I hadn't been born, I wouldn't be able to die. So that is one way of looking, but it's not very deep. Another way of looking is to say that birth and death inter-are. Just like you say that dependent on the left, you have the right. If you didn't have the left, you wouldn't have the right. So these two things are like opposites, and they need each other. But then if we look deeply again, we will see that birth and death are ideas. They are not something real. We have ideas about birth and death, but when you're dead, you don't exist anymore. When you're born, you start to exist. So it's obviously that people die and people are born, but we have all kinds of ideas about birth and death, which we attach the ideas to these two words. And we don't see birth and death as they actually are. And if we look again, we can see that dependent on death is birth. If there was no death, there couldn't be birth, because we would keep going on and on the whole time. And there wouldn't be room for anybody left on the planet. So you can't have birth without having death. And then the Buddha asks, dependent on what? Dependent on being is birth. And some people will say that if there's no such thing as being, you can't be, you cannot be born. So, when we look again at this, we can look at the sutra, one of the sutras on emptiness. And in that sutra on emptiness, the Buddha says that when we hear about old age and death, we always have the idea that there is someone who is old and someone who dies. We think that I am old, or he is old, and that inside the old age and inside the death, there is a person. There is a person who dies, and there is a person who is old. So the Buddha said the person who can answer the question, who is it who dies? Who is it who grows old? Will be able to overcome birth and death. And what the Buddha means by that is when you can see there is no one who grows old, there's no one who dies, then you are no longer caught in the fear of old age and death. Old age and death are just processes that happen dependent on causes and conditions. There isn't a person who grows old and who dies. And we suffer because we believe in that person who grows old and who dies. So dependent on being is birth. And this is something that Thai has made very clear to us, what is meant by this, by drawing a line and saying this is a birth and this is death. This is non-being. So before we are born, we are non-being. And after we are born, we're being. And after we die, we're non-being again. So our ideas about birth and death are not different from our ideas about being and non-being. If we don't have ideas of birth and death, we won't have ideas of being and non-being. If we don't have ideas of being and non-being, we won't have ideas of birth and death. So, by removing our ideas of birth and death, at the same time we remove our ideas of non-being and of being. So the next is interesting. The next link is and this word for grasping is, in Sanskrit, is upadana. And the Buddha says that grasping here means grasping to views. And upadana is also used about our 5 skandhas. Our body, our feelings, our perceptions, our mental formations, and our consciousness. They are called the 5 skandhas of grasping. Because there can be 5 skandhas which don't have grasping. It can be 5 skandhas where we are free in the 5 skandhas. But most of the time, most of us, we are caught in thinking this body is me, this feeling is me, and so we grasp to the five skandhas. So this kind of grasping is grasping to ideas, grasping to views. And that is why being, this means the idea of being. The idea of being and non-being is due to our habit of our mind to grasp to things. When we look at these nidanas, these links, we see that they come from our unconscious mind or our subconscious mind. They don't come from our mind consciousness. There are things that we have internal formation about. We have habit of anushaya, the tui meaning. They have the latent tendency. They are very deep beliefs that we have in us. They are not in our mind. So after that we have dependent on feeling. When scientists look at bacteria or single cell beings, not complex like us, they see that the bacteria have a kind of perception. They are able to, if something is hot, they can move away from it. And if something is sweet, they will move towards it. If something acid, they will move away from it. So even the very smallest living organisms, they have the ability to feel and to either like something or not like it, to go towards it or to move away from it. And the same is true with light. They move toward. So when we talk about feeling here, we can link it to that, and we can see that it's something very deep in us that we inherited from forms of life that were there billions of years ago. And that is the things that are generally we see to be for our survival. We will move toward them. If we see something will destroy us, we move away from it. Although we know that's not always true, but generally that is the pattern. So there are things we give us a pleasant feeling and things that give us unpleasant feeling. And things that we have a neutral feeling, we don't think that's pleasant or unpleasant, so we don't move away from it and we don't move towards it. So this is something, this craving here, dependent on feeling, is like the craving to to exist, the craving to survive. So tanha is the word for craving. And craving, it means thirst. It means to be thirsty for. And we know that there are 3 kinds of craving in Buddhism. One is called bhava-tanha. And bhava-tanha means craving for being. And then there's another one, it's called vibhava-tanha. And that is craving for not being. Tired of this life, tired of going around and around in samsara. You want not to be anymore, not to be in the... So this can be 2 things, or you're very afraid of not surviving, or you're very afraid of surviving. So these are 2 kinds of craving. So when we talk about craving here, it's not just craving for things that bring us pleasure, but it's craving, much deeper craving than that. It's craving for survival or not wanting to live anymore. So dependent on contact is feeling. So if you think about the bacteria who either goes towards something or moves away from it. So if you think about acid, for instance, there's acid, and then the bacteria will have the contact with the acid, and because of that, there will be an unpleasant feeling, and it move away from that. So we have contact with our senses, our eyes, ears, nose, our body, and our mind, and that contact is what gives us feeling. So contact here is talking about perception. This is a kind of basic perception. There's a scientist, they've done quite a bit of recently of work on looking into what is perception. What happens when we perceive something? And we know that we normally think that I'm in here and there's a world outside there. And when I hear something, I see something, I'm getting in touch with the world outside there. But in the Buddhist teachings, we always say that the perceiver and the perceived are one. They are not 2 separate things. So there isn't a consciousness in here which gets in touch with a world outside there. We hear that a lot from Thai. We hear that in Buddhist teachings. And we believe that what Thai say must be right. But it's very difficult for us to grasp what is meant by the perceiver and the perceived are not 2 separate things. And that there isn't a world out there that we think is out there. And sometimes when the scientists look into this and they do experiments, it helps us a little bit to understand more concretely what happens in perception, which here is a matter of contact. So there is there are a couple of neuroscientists Francisco Valera. Yeah, they are from Chile in South America, and they are in the University of Santiago, and they talk about perception, which is very like the Buddhist way of talking about perception. They talk about perception as structural coupling. Difficult word. This word coupling, it's like two things, a couple, two things. So it means that the interdependence of the perceiver and the perceived. And structural means that there are two structures. For instance, we take the human being as the structure. It's made up of cells, which are always interacting with each other. Some of the cells are nerve cells, some of the cells are heart cells, and so on. So in this structure that we call a human being, change is taking place the whole time. So, for instance, this is the human being. And then you have something that, so there's always a kind of feedback taking place in the human being, which means that messages are always being sent within the human being. So you get a message from your toe to your brain, and so that we know what's happening inside of ourselves. Well, we don't know what's happening, but there's always things changing and messages being sent from one part of our structure to another part of our structure. So the feelings we have, like the happiness we have, or the suffering that we have, is kind of like messages being sent around in our structure. And then there's another human being here. It's the same. This human being also, the messages going around within that human being. And then there's what is called the coupling. But this needn't necessarily be a human being. It could be a tree. It could be a rock. So for some reason, there is what is called a disturbance. A disturbance, you know that word, yeah. There's a disturbance here and here, which means that you give your attention to, this is you, huh? You give your attention to this object here. And when you give your attention to this object, it already gives its attention to you. But because you have all these things going on in yourself, and this also has thing going on in itself, you don't see the thing as it really is. Because of how you are, you see this thing outside of you as being that. And when you have a perception of this, it changes this. And when this has a perception of you, it changes you. So it's like a feedback where the one is giving rise to the other. And this is what they call bringing forth the world. And this bringing forth the world, bringing about the world which you consider to be the world outside of you, is happening at every instant, at every second. And we think the world is just like that outside of ourselves. But in fact, our way of perceiving is what is bringing about that world. And that world is just really in us. It's not. There is some disturbance, some stimuli, but we never see it as it is. We only see what our own mind produces. So in human relations, it's also quite interesting to look like this and to see that how we interact with each other as humans and in society. Because in society we have the idea of a dominance. That is always somebody who is superior to others and who dominates others. And we feel for our security we need to be dominant. So that idea of needing to be dominant, it's stops us from seeing that the other person also needs to be dominant. And most of our society, with competition, with the economic system, it is caught in this kind of one set of people dominating another set of people. In a short video clip that we watched when we were preparing for today, there were a number of refugees from Syria who now come to Europe, and they put them in a room where there was no decoration at all, just a very plain room in pairs. So they would put one refugee maybe with somebody who already lived in the country, a non-refugee, and they would just sit and look at each other. They didn't say anything, they were just told to just look at the person in front of you, to make eye contact. So this is like these two They just looked, and you don't know the other person at all. You don't know anything about them. You don't have any idea, any preconceived idea about the other person, and you just look at them, and you, at that point, you bring about the understanding that you and this person are not two separate realities. It brings a lot of happiness to recognize that. Just to be able to look and see that, oh, this person's coming from my consciousness, and I am coming from that person's consciousness. And so we completely enter without needing any words or any concepts. So, obviously in our own practice, every day when we're in touch with each other, we know about each other already. We know, oh, that sister comes from that place, that sister is the work coordinator, and so on. We know a lot about each other. But we can still look at each other, because Taya's daughter says, and you see somebody coming towards you, and you say, oh, hello myself. Because you know that that person is arising from your consciousness. It's not that some kind of reality, fixed reality outside of you. Yeah, thank you.